And she's a Galveston girl. That's the most important part about Monique Pressley. How y'all doing? Is everybody good? You're not gonna get sleepy on me because we have something to eat, are you? I'm interactive, so I gotta hear you talking back to me while I'm up here. I want to acknowledge and recognize, I know that they've already been recognized by name, but we have so many elected officials and representatives from the Galveston area and beyond who took the time to come today, and I thank you so much for that. The members of the board of Old Central Cultural Center Incorporated for thinking it was important enough to have a social justice luncheon in these perilous times we're in. Especially Ms. Kenesha Allen for her tireless effort, hard work, vision, stick-to-itiveness. You all have something special in this Ms. Allen. Can we give her a hand? She deserves it. She's worked so hard. Thank you so much for your vision and for answering the call. Because many people have visions about things, but then they don't do the thing that they've had the vision about. So I thank you for your follow-through, because it's wonderful to be here. There are some members of my high school class here. I'm not going to call our names, but I am going to say I am a proud member of Ball High School class of 1988, and we are, we are about to celebrate our 30th anniversary. I cannot believe it, but I'm looking forward to it. Finally, my family is here. If I start naming everybody that I know in the room, will be here forever. But I do want to honor my parents, Mr. and Mrs. H. Michael and Joyce Ann. There's probably no one in Galveston who doesn't know them, but certainly everything that I am and hope to be, I owe to them. And their son-in-law, the man who thought it was a good idea to give me his last name, is in here somewhere, or maybe he's out with our son right now. I have 3 children, 2 in the room, 2 not. I see Daniel, I see Grace. They've got their devices. They're kind of mom's impromptu PR team, so they are here as well. And finally, greetings to the residents of the finest island in the world and the absolutely best hometown, Galveston, Texas. Being here today, I have to tell you, this has to be what Dorothy was feeling like in The Wizard of Oz when she clicked her heels 3 times and said, "There's no place like home, no place like home, no place like home." It is my honor. I have been blessed to speak many places and in many formats, but there is nothing more special to me than the honor of coming and speaking to all of the members of the community for whom I owe the biggest debt, who took the time when I was a little girl, when I was doing something I didn't have any business doing, to say, now, you know your mama wouldn't want you to do that. For those who taught me, for those who took time to impart in me. I saw, and he must have just had to leave, but I still want to say his name, Mr. Doug Matthews, who was, I believe, the first Black city manager for Galveston, who is here and just went out. I see his lovely wife still here. He was my first employer. He gave me my first job. I don't even know how good of a job I did, but thank you, Doug. Thank you, I appreciate you. What better place indeed could there be than Galveston to have an inaugural social justice luncheon in the midst of all of the festivities of Juneteenth? What better place than the birthplace of Juneteenth, the sacred ground where freedom was announced and where the government finally got its act together enough to come and free a remaining 250,000 men and their wives and their children out of the bonds of slavery in Texas. Now, it took 2 years for them to get here, and I've often thought about what that must have been like, that 700 plus days. Isn't it kind of like the way it can be with us when you're free, except for nobody told you, so you're still living bound? So that's what they went through for 700 days. They went through some days of still being whipped, and some died even though they should have already been freed, and they were working without wages, and they were working in substandard conditions, and they were disrespected, and they were mistreated, all the while free. So I thought, Kanisha, that it really would be important for this inaugural social justice luncheon, as we are a people now in this nation in the midst of the kind of turmoil and chaos and leaderlessness that perhaps even those of you who are elders in the room can't remember seeing in this country. I thought that it would be important for us to talk afresh and anew about freedom. Why the collective liberties that we hold so dear are in danger and jeopardy now, like perhaps never before. So it's critical that we discuss today freedom. And if I had to give it a topic, my topic would be when we let it. When we let it. I'll clean it up, you'll understand it in a moment, but my topic is when we let it. You can't have a social justice luncheon and not know what social justice is. Social justice is based on the concepts of human rights and equality. It can be defined as the way in which human rights are manifested in our everyday lives for people at all levels in every area of society. If I was to sit back in my legal training, I would probably give you a more technical definition. I would say social justice is the fair and proper administration of laws, conforming to the natural law that all persons, irrespective of ethnic origin, gender, possessions, race, religion, are to be treated equally and without prejudice. Social justice is a political, and they told me, they said Old Central Cultural Center is not a political organization, and I thought it through and I said, you know, the organization isn't political, but every single member better be, or we are in danger, danger, danger. Social justice is political, philosophical concept, which holds that everybody, all of us, should have equal access to wealth, to health, to well-being, to justice, to opportunity. Now, the founding fathers of this country were perfect, truly perfect architects of the concept of social justice. They were actually champions of social justice, at least on paper. I mean, you can't write, can you? We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, without having a firm grasp on social justice. The failure, though, of those architects, of those founding fathers, came in executing and enforcing the laws they drafted. We know, most of us in this room, the history of our people. We're clear that while those who were in power were exercising unalienable rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, our ancestors were spending their lives enslaved when this country was founded. Our ancestors were absent liberty. Our ancestors were severely punished for even thinking too loudly about the notion of pursuing happiness. Our ancestors in slavery, while building the foundation that enabled those in power to pursue happiness, were not permitted to do so themselves. In effect, our country was no promise keeper. You see, we had a declaration that we should have been able to stand on way back in 1776. But by the time Dr. King stood on the steps of the Lincoln Monument, that promise still hadn't been kept in 1963. I think often, and have been, especially these days, about his I Have a Dream speech. And since I live in DC, with all the crazies. I have gone frequently in the past decades that I've been there and sat in that very space where he stood and looked out across the reflection pool all the way down to the Capitol, and I can see when the light is blinking that members of Congress are still there working, and I've often thought, what a burden that must have been for Dr. King in 1963 to be 100 years past the Declaration of Independence and for there to be still so much dependence, for the N in independence to be missing for people of color. He talked about this very thing that I'm talking about today. He talked about what it means to be free in name only because our leaders and our government don't keep their word. There's certain parts of his speech that everybody knows and everybody likes and everybody enjoys. You know, we know that in the I Have a Dream speech that the oratorical gift was on full display. We know that by the time he got to the end of it, he was declaring that we should let freedom ring, but he didn't start with any of those. He didn't start the speech with racial harmony or little black children and little white children all running and skipping down the lane together. No, he started with the metaphor of a bad check. Dr. King said, and I'm going to give you a little bit of the speech, 50 years ago, at that time it was 100 years before he spoke in 1963. Dr. King said, a great American, he's talking about Lincoln, in whose symbolic shadow we stand today, signed the Emancipation Proclamation. This momentous decree came as a great beacon of light and hope to millions of Negro slaves who had been seared in the flames of withering injustice. It came as a joyous daybreak to end the long night of their captivity. But 100 years later, Dr. King said in 1963, the Negro is still not free. 100 years later, Dr. King told the thousands out on the lawn that day, the life of the Negro is still sadly crippled by the manacles of segregation and the chains of discrimination. 100 years later, Dr. King stretched his voice out over the crowd and declared, the Negro lives on a lonely island of poverty in the midst of a vast ocean of material prosperity. 100 years later, he said, in 1963, the Negro is still languished in the corners of American society and finds himself an exile in his own land. And he said they were there that day to dramatize the shameful condition. And I started thinking about that when I was getting ready to speak to you today. And I said, perhaps what we're here to do now, 100 years later, plus another 55 years, plus another 75 years, what we're here to do now is to dramatize that shameful condition. Isn't it the case that just as it was in 1963, it is in 2018, that it's not 100 years later anymore, but we still see the Negro, although we've changed our name, our conditions not so much. Still crippled by segregation, although not legal. We are still segregated in our churches, and we are still segregated in the quality of our schooling, and we are still segregated through incarceration, mass incarceration, and we are still segregated in where we live. Not 100 years ago, which is what Dr. King said. I hear it. But now, isn't it case? Now, not 100 years ago, like Dr. King said, but in 2018, that in the midst of all of the wealth of our great country, the material prosperity, that there are islands of poverty for our people. Isn't it the case? Now that we find ourselves in exile, isn't it the case? In a sense, though, I'm here to declare and charge us with cashing the check that Dr. King came to the lawn to declare and cash. He said that it's time for the architects of our republic to do what they promised us in the Declaration of Independence. That it was a promissory note to which every American was to fall heir. The note was a promise that all men, yes, black and white, and the women, would be guaranteed the unalienable rights of life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. It's obvious, isn't it, today, that America has defaulted on this promissory note, insofar as our citizens of color are concerned, that instead of honoring this sacred obligation, Americans are still writing us bad checks. Our checks keep coming back insufficient funds. Dr. King refused to believe, as do I, that our Department of Justice is bankrupt. That bank is not broke. We refuse to believe that there are no funds available for us to cash this long overdue check. And no, I'm not talking about reparations, though it would be nice, it would be nice. What I am talking about is the check that guarantees equality of access. The check that guarantees equal treatment on the streets for brothers and sisters who are just trying to get from the 7-Eleven to the Walmart. The check that guarantees that schooling will be made available at qualities that are deserving for all children, no matter which side of the tracks you came from, no matter what your family's last name is, no matter whether you own property or not, that you will have the same unalienable rights. I think often and hear Dr. King in my head imploring our nation's leaders, bringing them to task for the illegality, the inhumanity, the abuse of our people. I could hear him reminding them of what our meaningful freedoms should be. And it pains me, especially these days, that that promise has not yet been fulfilled. It is this fullness of freedom, this meaningful freedom, that we are now all required to demand for ourselves and for our children and for their children. But we're not truly free, meaningfully free, if we're not free in 4 areas. And I'm going to talk to you about these 4 areas and then go right here to my seat. I'd argue today that we're not free unless we're physically free, economically free, mentally free, and spiritually free. 4 areas: physical freedom, economic freedom, mental freedom, and spiritual freedom. Physical freedom, we understand. Freedom from chains, shackles, physical confinement, or lack of ability to move. We know that we came to this country. No, we were brought to this country, snatched from our native land into slavery. We were snatched from liberty, from life as heirs of kings and queens, from home ownership, from property ownership. We were snatched from a history of the building of temples and pyramids into bondage. Many who crossed those waters did not make it, died in the bowels of those ships. And then even when we had the Emancipation Proclamation in 1863, or for those of us who are celebrating tomorrow, June 19, 1865, the announcement of the abolition of slavery made its way to our shores. But the reality is that that bondage, subjugation, alienation, isolation that was once accomplished with physical chains has morphed and changed itself every few years over the past 155 years to keep the caste system of slavery alive and well in the United States. Dr. Michelle Alexander wrote a book several years ago entitled The New Jim Crow: Mass Incarceration in the Age of So-Called Colorblindness. Her book is a stunning account of what the rebirth of the caste system, the class system, the slave master and slave system looks like in the modern era. One that's resulted in millions of African Americans locked behind bars in the penal system, and then relegated to a permanent second-class status, denied the very rights supposedly won in the civil rights movement. The devastating reality is the majority of Black men in major urban areas are under correctional control or saddled with criminal records for life. How many of you know that's not free? Jim Crow laws, yes, were wiped off the books. You can't intentionally discriminate. But the extraordinary percentage of the African American community is currently warehoused in prisons, trapped in a parallel social universe, denied basic civil rights, basic human rights, including the right to vote, the right to serve on juries, the right to be free of legal discrimination in employment and housing and access to education and public benefits. All of what our ancestors, some of them in this very room, fought, bled, died for. We find now that a young brother of 18 years old can be walking down the street with a dime bag of marijuana in his back pocket. Not that he sold. He can be across the state line. In one state, marijuana is legal, and the next one it's not. He can cross literally a block and get arrested, be found guilty, go to jail, 18 years old, come out 2 years, 5 years, 10 years later, depending on whether he resisted arrest or not, for the carrying of a small amount of a substance that's legal in multiple states in our country. And his life is gone. When he comes out, everything about what was promised to him will be snatched. Depending on the state he's in, he might not be able to vote. He won't be able to fill out a job application without including that he's a convicted felon. He won't be able to rent an apartment. He certainly won't be able to serve in any elected capacity. What are we doing with our young men as we watch the new slave trade called the United States penal system? Even though it's no longer permissible to use race explicitly as a justification for discrimination, for social contempt, the scourge, the stain, is on our brothers, whether they did it or not. And before you write me off saying, well, Monique, if you break the law, you have to pay the cost. I understand. I know we have some law and order in the room. I'm a defense attorney by trade, so I'm not going to apologize. I was telling my mother yesterday, she said, you defend, you defend, you defend. I said, I do. And here's why. Because recent studies have shown that over 10,000 people are wrongfully convicted in the United States every year. 10,000 people. That's 10,000 brothers, fathers, nephews, uncles, sons, husbands. Yes, it disproportionately affects the African American community. Yes, it disproportionately affects our men. What does that do to our community? What does it do, ladies? All my single mamas know what it does. We know what it's like to have a burden that you didn't intend because the man who was supposed to be in the home to help has been removed from the home through an unfair, disproportionate sentencing, through an unfair, disproportionate prosecution, through an unfair, disproportionate justice system. And I hear you, it really is just us, right? Nelson Mandela says, freedom is indivisible. The chains on any one of my people were the chains on all of them. The chains on all of my people were the chains on me. I say that today because even if that is not our story in Galveston, It's our story in Houston. If it's not our story in Houston, it's our story in Dallas. If it's not our story in Dallas, I'm here to tell you it's our story in Washington, D.C. It matters. The chains of our brothers and sisters, even though they not be on us physically, are our chains. Nelson also said only free men can negotiate. Prisoners can't enter contracts. We want our brothers to learn how to do business, but they can't do it from jail. Dead men can't contract either. I learned that in law school. But I'm not talking about dead men who live long lives and die of natural causes. I'm talking about dead men who are convicted of DWB. Does anybody know what DWB is? Driving while black. WWB, what's that? Walking while black. I heard somebody. EWB. We have EWB now. What's that? Eating while black. SWB. What's SWB? Yes, shopping while black. I heard another S. Is there another one? So we've got these stops on, as the brothers in the city would say, trumped up charges for that DWB while he was WWB, finishing his EWB, trying to go SWB. But somewhere along the way, the police see him doing what he has every right to do, the unalienable right of life, liberty, pursuit of happiness. He ought to at least be able to pursue a cup of coffee in Starbucks without somebody calling and saying it looks a little fishy. What's going on in this country right now where we can't barbecue? They won't even let us barbecue, y'all. While black. Too much smoke on the lawn? Really, people? But it's a fact that we, as African Americans, especially our brothers, are disproportionately stopped, searched, frisked, arrested, beaten, shot, killed at the hands of law enforcement. It is a fact that we especially are disproportionately killed unarmed. What is it about these black bodies that is so petrifying to the powers that be in the United States of America? Perhaps it's our power resting. Perhaps they know what we would be if they didn't stop us. Perhaps they know what we would be if we weren't hindered. Perhaps they know what we would be if we weren't shackled. We know the names: Terrence Crutcher, Philando Castile, Samuel DuBose, Sandra Bland, Freddie Gray, Walter Scott, Akai Gurley, Laquan McDonald, so many more. I name those names because for every one of those cases where those young men and women died at the hands of law enforcement, only one of them was there a conviction. Only one of them was there a guilty plea. The rest were either acquitted, charges dropped, no charges brought at all. What is our charge when we're watching our sons and daughters die at the hands of the government that wrote them a check that's not yet cashed? What is our charge? Aren't their shackles our shackles? But you know, just like free men can only negotiate, dead men can't contract, I'm here to tell you, if you're incarcerated, if you're physically bound, or even if you're not physically bound and you don't have economic freedom, you're not free. It's one thing to not have shackles around you, but it's another thing if you don't have enough money to even pay attention. It's nothing really if you're out of jail, if you can't afford to ride down the street to get to your job. According to the U.S. Census Bureau, September 2017, 22% of Black Americans are right now living in poverty. 22% of us are in poverty. This means that while other demographics have been generationally passing wealth. We have been generationally passing debt. While other generations have been generationally passing property, we have been passing leasing contracts and rental agreements. While other demographics have been passing trades, we, in larger percentages, have been passing problems to the next generation. Poverty is not an accident, Mandela says. He says, like slavery and apartheid, it is man-made and can be removed by the actions of human beings. Overcoming poverty is not a gesture of charity, it is an act of justice. What he's saying is it's something that can be fixed. It's something that can be handled by us. But there has to be a level playing field. I mean, why is it that when the black businesses go to get access to capital and loans, they seem to have so many more problems than our minority counterparts? Why is it that when we go and we save the money to own the homes, that the predatory lenders see us coming and going? Why is it that in African American communities, we have dollar stores, but we do not have grocery stores? What is the messaging to our people that's being passed from one generation to the next? And what is our obligation to do something, to take hold of our own economic freedom? So if you can't be physically free without being economically free, you can't be economically free if you're not physically free. I'm 100% certain that neither of those two things matter if you are trapped within the confines of your own mind. In the very wise words of a few women, I'm going to date myself with this one, from the group En Vogue, remember them? Free your mind, what's the rest? And the rest will follow. Obviously, if we're going to make it out at all, we've got to come out head first. Head first. Same way we come in the world, right, with a natural delivery. Head first is the way that we're going to come out of every single thing that this country, that this world, that this system, that our community, that our families, whatever the responsibility is, at the end of the day, it makes it right back down to me. Education. One of the core mission statements of this beautiful organization. To increase the cultural awareness and promote educational opportunities. Did I get it right, Kanisha? That's what All Central is about. Education is the most powerful weapon we can use to change the world. But all the more, it's the most powerful weapon we can use to change our own lives. It is critically important for communities, and I'm going to just talk about women for a minute because I am one, to empower our girls through education with a focus on balanced, non-stereotypical models. Oprah Winfrey, when asked how she views the significance of educating girls and harnessing the potential of girls' voices, said, "Are you kidding? It's the way. It is the capital T-H-E way. Because it's not just rhetoric, it's a fact that when you change a girl's life, you affect her vision of herself, her immediate world, and the world she will impact. If you give a girl $1 or $2 or $5 to be educated, it changes communities around the world. They've learned in other countries that if you go to the elders, go through the men, then pay the women to educate themselves, these young girls will turn around and change families in their community. Time and time again, because we as women are nurturers. We give back. The first thing we want to do when we get anything is help our brothers and sisters. We help our mothers, we help our children. Statistics have shown that when you empower a girl, you don't just change one girl's life, you change the whole family. I'm thankful as I stand here that I came from an educator mother. She knew the importance of education, and she insisted upon it. As I tell my children now, it's not optional, it's required. And she and my dad sacrificed so that I could have the best possible education. And then it caught hold to the fact that I cared so much about educating myself that I insisted upon it for my life. I don't know where I would be. I don't know what I would be doing. It wouldn't be on this stage right now talking to you about this, but for what a book in my hands did in getting that information into my brain. But it's not just education. What we are ignoring in this country is the mental health of our citizens. We have children going to school in fear that the unspeakable anguish suffered at other schools will happen to them. They don't know when they're going in, if they're going to die at the hands of some sick person with a gun. We have youth who couldn't pass the 72-hour cycle using weapons of war in our country. We have literally a sick nation. And all the more so in the African American community, because it's hard for us to accept that just like you would go to the doctor and get treated for cancer, and just like you're gonna take your blood pressure medicine, if something's going on in that brain, honey, get it checked out and take your meds. Get it checked out. There's no shame in it. There's no harm in it. We're killing ourselves. The word says we perish. For what? Oh, I got some Bible people in here. That's good. Because you know what? You can be free in your body and free in your mind and free in your pocketbook, but if you're not spiritually free, you can forget about it. You can forget about it. If you don't know that there's more to this life than you standing in your own 2 feet, that there's not a single thing that you could do but for the higher power making it happen, if you don't understand the relationship between your spirit man and the spirit man of your neighbor, and that there is a God and that you need God on your side, you're not free. Freedom in the spirit means that you're not bound to the demonic warfare of this world. Freedom in the spirit realm means that just because everybody else is doing it, as Mama used to tell me and I now tell my kids, doesn't mean you have to too. We have to be free enough in our minds to blaze a trail, and we have to be free enough in our spirits to liberate our minds to do it. We have to know in our knower that God would not have you in bondage. God would have you walk free. The best part of the dream speech was not actually original to it. I don't know how many of you know that the Let Freedom Ring part of the I Have a Dream speech wasn't in the speech. That Dr. King had done the speech a few times and that part wasn't in there. That was specific. The first time that he started talking about letting freedom ring was in 1963, that day in Washington, D.C. And we all know that part. We know let freedom ring from the mighty mountains of New York, let freedom ring from the heightened Alleghenies of Pennsylvania, let freedom ring from the snow-capped Rockies of Colorado, let freedom ring from the curvaceous slopes of California. We know all about that, and you can hear Dr. Martin saying it better than I ever could. But what I learned in studying the speech is that we missed the let. We missed the let. Because I was asking myself, when will we be free? Jesus wins freedom. Like the slaves, they used to say, promised land. Where's promised land? North. North. But I was thinking, when's freedom? When? And then I looked back at his speech and I saw, he says, and when this happens, and when we allow freedom ring, when we let it ring, when we let it ring from every village and every hamlet, from every state and every city. You see, we missed the let. Let for all my educators, is a transitive verb. It means to get from one place to the next. Let means to cause, to make something happen. We've been thinking about the let that involves our government. We've been thinking about the let that involves people who have more. We've been thinking about the let that sits back and lets somebody else go, but that's not what Dr. King was talking about in his I Have a Dream speech. When he talked about letting freedom ring, he said, when we let it ring. That's why I'm here asking you today, when freedom, when we let it, when we cause it to, when we make it to, when we give it the opportunity to, when we refuse to prevent it from, when we remove the bonds from freedom, it will ring. So when there's a brother who needs our help in our community and he doesn't have enough money for an education, and we remove the bonds of poverty from his life, we let freedom ring. When there's a sister who already has 2 children out of wedlock and she doesn't have what she needs to feed them and she doesn't have a way to get to the job, and we stop and we give her the ride, we let freedom ring. When we see an injustice in our community and we could just look the other way, but instead we stop and we turn and we speak and we say and we report, we let freedom ring. We make for the ringing of freedom. I can almost hear some freedom ringing now, because see, to be free from confinement means that someone let the gate open. To not be in bondage, right, means that somebody let the shackles loose. In order for your voice to be heard, you've got to let your voice soar. It means to make it happen. It's not that somebody can come in and pull it from you. It's that you have to have a made-up mind about doing it yourself. If we're really all in this together, when we let freedom ring, we don't worry about the fact that they have predatory lenders. We form our own real estate alliances. When we let freedom ring, we get 3 or 4 or 5 or 10 or 20 or 30 of us together, the way they did back decades and centuries ago, and we make our own banks, and then we lend in our own communities, and then we lend to our own businesses. When we let freedom ring, we then support those black businesses that we help to form, right? When we let freedom ring, we're sure that we honor our women and girls as queens. We don't stand by and see girls on the streets being trafficked and act like we don't know what's going on. When we let freedom ring, we let it, we make it ring. The best example that I could find of letting is in Genesis chapter 1. In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth was without form and void, and darkness was on the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters. And God said, let there be light. And there was light. You see, with God in spirit, God has the let in his voice. When God says let, then there is. And if you know who you are in God, can't help it, a little bit of preacher in me. When you know who you are in God, then the let of God is in you. The transformative voice that God has reigns right within your spirit, in your mouth, in your hands, at your feet. We have creativity in us that is right now untapped. When we let freedom ring, we can see that we really don't need permission to do what is right to do. Dr. King talked about a demand for payment, not a request. How do we know that in spite of all the obstacles, that when we let freedom ring, we'll be successful? Because we are the most resilient, inventive, creative, resourceful, brilliant, contributive cultures in this melting pot of a country. We have already taken our rightful places in the halls of justice, all the way to the Supreme Court, in the scientific laboratories, in research hospitals, in surgical suites, in concert halls, entertainment screens, large and small. We've been to outer space, and yes, even the highest office in the land as the leader of the free world. These are things we have already done while bound. These are things that happen while our brothers and sisters are still in chains. This is what we were able to accomplish with somebody's foot on our neck. What could we be when we let freedom reign? What couldn't we accomplish when that Liberty Bell is ringing for us? I hear that bell ringing today, not just for me or for my family. I hear it for you, for your family. I hear it for our children ringing. And I am certain that if we put our collective voices together, we'll let freedom ring at the voting booth. We'll let freedom ring in our churches. We will let freedom ring in our communities. We will let freedom ring with our government and elected officials. We will let freedom ring at the banking institutions. We will let freedom ring all over this globe until we can say exactly what I know Dr. King would want me to leave you with today. Free at last. Free at last. Thank God Almighty. We're free at last.
Oh, don't get up right.